It also, in terms of the testing piece of it, Margaret, in terms of how testing is used to determine credentialing and all of that, is that it allows states to set standards. It allows states to sort of gauge all of that. It no longer rewards based on credentialing that is academic in terms of the teacher or the professors, but rather on actual classroom success or the success of students, not the credentials of the academic credentials of a teacher. It's all of the things that do exactly what you're talking about and go absolutely opposite of what you were talking about that our president is doing. So we feel pretty good about it in the House, and it was really strong bipartisan too. A lot of it was, some of it not so much, but other parts were. So I hear you, appreciate it. Thanks for raising the issue. Ron.
4 years ago, Byron Gordon had his town hall meeting in Edgeley, North Dakota. From the microphone, when he was introducing me, he says, "I understand from your letter to the editor of the Bismarck Tribune that you're a birther." That's been 4 years ago. This packet now has everything in there that's being presented to the Congress to take it to a committee to see why that birth certificate on the WhiteHouse.gov site is a sophomore forgery, a fraud, a felony, and a national security risk. So, then presented down to Kevin, meet with him. There's 3 congressmen bringing it to the floor of the Congress. Steve Stockton from Texas, Ted Yoho from Florida, and a Fernelli or something from Pennsylvania, and take it to the floor of the House. It is the worst, the most egregious constitutional crisis in American history, despite all these other things we talk about. So, Kevin?
Thanks, Ron, and I will take a look at it. I will tell you that I'm not overly interested, quite honestly. Barack Obama was elected president once, and he was re-elected twice, and I have lots of reasons to not have supported him the first 2 times, and I have lots of reasons to continue to work in opposition to some of the things he wants to do, but also work with him with some of the things he wants to do. And I just find this is more of a distraction, frankly, than help. But thank you. I will take a strong look at it, a good look at it. And I think if this issue really was going to make a difference, it would have made a bigger difference in his re-election. That's my answer. So, yes. As a senior citizen.
The Medicare area is my health care. I read and I believe that there is waste in Medicare. Are you thinking about solutions?
Solutions to cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, that's really what we need to be about all the way around. It's much more urgent than I thought.
That was good.
And we've heard about some pretty egregious abuse lately, haven't we? Reading about it and how a doctor could falsify. This is the Friday, right, when it happens? Is it every Friday? I really didn't plan it around this. I want you to know I did not plan this around the silence. How long does it go?
About 30 seconds.
About a minute, okay. So we know that abuse can and does happen at a very high level. But I think part of the solution can be more patient, accountability, more empowerment of the patient themselves. Some abuse and fraud is always going to happen. Anytime there's a program, it's going to happen, and we have to assume that, but we have to do everything we can to resist it. And while minimizing fraud and abuse is an important part of a solution, I think there are other solutions that are even bigger in terms of how we can deal with Medicare. And you heard me talk about some of them earlier in terms of the longevity. But now you're on Medicare. You said it's your health care. You are entitled to it. You've earned it. You paid into it. It's yours. It should be yours forever. And we can do more to make it higher quality. We want to empower you, give you choice. But in terms of what we need to do, I think, in terms of the fraud side, is to empower the patient to turn in suspicion to listen to that suspicion, to investigate suspicious activity as it comes to us. But I don't think what I don't think we need is a great big bureaucracy that would do it. So sort of non-committal, but I hear you. I appreciate it. Audrey, come on up. Take your time, Audrey. We're stalling.
I'm concerned about Medicare too. The big thing is Medicare Advantage. The regular Medicare that most of us have, that's when we get a bill from the doctor or the hospital, goes to Medicare. Medicare pays 80%, and then the rest goes to like Blue Cross Blue Shield, mostly in this state. Medicare Advantage, when the bill goes to the insurance company, and they, if it's $1,000, they add it to $1,500. That's part of the way they're trying to bankrupt Medicare. So I don't like Medicare Advantage, and they keep saying on TV, thousands of people are doing that. So I really think that's one of the big problems. Yes, fraud, they've done a lot. Gotten a lot of that done. I hope they pick it up, but this to me is another part of the problem.
Her objection, of course, is to Medicare Advantage, and the supplements that are available, of course, that comes down to the consumer and consumer choice, right? And whether or not you're able to purchase some of those, sort of up to the consumer in your situation. Do you have something on that issue? You want to use this? Okay. Thank you, Julie. Julie represents livestock producers, supports the farm bill. Appreciate the kind words about my work on it. I've never worked so hard in my life as I did on the farm bill, and never found it so rewarding. But we're gonna reserve celebration until it's all over. But the livestock provisions, the things important to livestock, really are in both the House and the Senate version of the bill, which speaks very promising. Of course, just what the conference committee will do is they'll have to reconcile mainly differences. Now, a lot of things can happen in the conference committee. Things that were united can sometimes become bargaining chips with other interests. But by and large, I think you're pretty good there. And I understand the King Amendment, and I understand the interstate commerce issue and the scientific. She's asking to maintain the high scientific standards that we have in the House bill as part of the conference. So we'll work very hard in the House side to maintain those. In all honesty, the farm portion of the farm bill that came out of the House is really quite superior to the Senate bill, to the point where I have some farm groups telling me if we don't keep some of those, we'd rather not have the farm bill. I hope they're willing to work with us a little bit on the compromise, but we do have, I think, at least especially for our states, really good amendments. Yes, sir. His question is, let me paraphrase it and you tell me if this summarize what you think. His question is, am I prepared to leverage, I think, my vote for a continuing resolution of continuing funding of the government am I willing to hold that out as leverage for defunding Obamacare? Is that in a nutshell? Okay, that's the question. Okay. I'm surprised it took this long. I'm surprised. Here's what I want. Here's what I will say is, first of all, in my short time, I've had the opportunity to vote 3 times for some version of a repeal of Obamacare. One was an outright repeal. One actually was for a balanced budget, a budget that balances in 10 years, that repeals and withholds all the funding of Obamacare. We passed that in the House. And just before we left Congress, I voted for a bill that defunds the portion of the IRS budget. I know this is going to break all your hearts. The IRS budget that is designed specifically to carry out Obamacare, because as you know, the IRS is the enforcement agency of Obamacare, and if Obamacare itself didn't frighten you, that ought to. But, so I voted 3 times to do exactly that. The question of the continuing resolution being held out as a lever is an interesting one, and it's one we are dealing with separately in our own districts now, and we'll be dealing with together when we get back. My commitment is to do everything I can to succeed in repealing as much, if not all, of Obamacare. And thank you. And that is the will of the North Dakota public, is the will of the American public. That said, it is the law of the land, and so what I want to say to you is, I want to fight smart. I don't want to fight just for the sake of a fight. I want to fight for the sake of a victory. If holding out the continuing resolution can be successful, count me in. I'm not so sure about that, and we can talk about it. Shortly after the continuing resolution will be the debt ceiling. That's another opportunity where, remember, I serve in the majority in the House of Representatives, but that's not the majority in the Senate, and that's not the party in control of the White House. So when you have 1/3, so to speak, of the power, all budget issues start in the House, but they end in the Senate. So if 60 senators would go along with us, you'd have 234 votes to defund Obamacare just like that. Absent of that, we have to be strategic and smart about it. And that's why when I threw out all those other issues, you guys, like immigration reform, entitlement reform, comprehensive tax reform, when we come down to a deadline like this, a lot of things can get thrown into the negotiating hopper. I realize Obamacare is number 1 for you. And it's number 1 for a lot of people, but when you start putting that against other priorities, it becomes a little bit more challenging. So, we'll talk about that. I would also say this: you realize if we don't pass a continuing resolution, the government shuts down. Now, some things will continue to be good. Chuck says good. Well, it's always good for about a day, but it gets less good day by day, if you know what I'm saying. And that's why priorities you have to consider the priorities. The other thing is, Obamacare, over 95% of Obamacare is now an entitlement. It is mandatory spending. So if they call our bluff, so to speak, and shut down the government, the vast majority of Obamacare still is the law of the land. It's mandatory. So by shutting down the government, we don't shut down Obamacare. We may shut down the IRS's ability to enforce it, but the laws are still up. The collection, the taxes are still the taxes. They don't call them taxes. Did you notice that? They call them, what's it called? Responsible participation or something like that. Anyway, you wanted to say something.
Mayor, my name is Mary, and I want to comment on the statistics problem
Mary wants to comment on statistics.
that most people in America don't want.
Opposed.
This morning, I saw a poll number, it was 57% of Americans want referendum.
Okay, so she said that 57% of Americans, she saw a poll today, that 57% of Americans wanted funding. And I don't doubt you. I don't doubt that there's a poll like that that's out today, and I'll be happy to take a look at it. I can tell you, though, any time a law is massive, and I mean massive, over 2,000 pages massive, and the rules are now this high, one paper on top of another, this high, the rules. And that's the problem with passing a bill that nobody reads, that didn't get a single vote from the minority party. When you do something that big, that fast in the dark of night, when the Speaker of the House at the time, Nancy Pelosi, says we have to pass it to know what's in it, it requires more diligence than that to do something that big. And that's why we're going to do all we can to review it thoroughly and perhaps do exactly what you're talking about. I'm not committing to that, but that will definitely be one of the things on the table. Yes?
Kevin, what's your view on financial reform with Wall Street and the banks. And is Glass-Steagall the right direction to go?
Okay, his question is, what's my position on financial reforms? Is Glass-Steagall the way to go? And Wall Street reform. Dodd-Frank, President Obama did two things when he had the control of the Senate and the House for 2 years. Two massive reforms. One was the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, socialized medicine. The second was Dodd-Frank, which put such incredibly onerous and well-intended onerous regulations on your local banker that they're almost unable to lend. And the goal was to protect, of course, these too big to fail, right? That's what this is all about. Too big to fail banks. Banks that are investing in equities with your deposits, which has put your deposits at such risk that it's required a bailout that is multiple times the federal budget every year. Glass-Steagall was the law of the land for many decades that separated those two functions, investment banking from traditional lending. Is that the way to go? It's pretty dramatic, isn't it? It's pretty drastic, but it's gaining some momentum. And I have to tell you, I'm a Republican that's listening very carefully to that argument. Some have joined on, lots of Democrats have joined the move to return to Glass-Steagall, which separates, again, investment banking and the risky side of it from lending. I think there's merit in it. There should be no such thing as too big to fail. And if you fail, you fail. You know, we can't let them run the risks, go bankrupt, and then the taxpayer bails them out. We got to do better than that. So I'm considering Glass-Steagall. Yes, sir.
My name is John Griffin. I'm just a resident of Bismarck. But my main concern is the immigration reform bill. It's because some of the bills being discussed in the House. My question is, how can we possibly think until we get the border secured that if the way the Senate bill is in my opinion, how do we think that's going to be enforced? You look at the Affordable Care Act, that's the executive branch is just
He makes a very good point and a wonderful analogy, actually. Thank you for that, John. Because with regard to selective enforcement of the Affordable Care Act, which is really what the president has done, people say, how can he constitutionally, do these things? How can he say, no, we're going to just exempt you from that law? Well, what he does is he tells his law enforcement agencies, let's just not enforce that law for a year. That's how he does it, quote, constitutionally. So then it brings us to immigration reform. And John's point is right on. Securing the borders. How can we ensure that that's going to happen? And let me just give a lesson on the Senate bill. The Senate took up comprehensive immigration reform. And it was a pro-amnesty bill, right? It deals with a lot of legal immigration issues, and there are two issues: legal immigration and undocumented workers, or what we sometimes call illegal immigration. Those are two different issues that we have to address, both of them. The discussion always gravitates to illegal, but I want to talk about both for a minute. Senator Hoeven, with a couple of other colleagues, got an amendment in to do what you're talking about, securing the borders. Lots of money, lots of agents, and some policy. It made the bill better than it was, but it's far from good enough. But it's helpful to get a bill better, because when the House passes a bill and you go to conference, when you're closer together, it's easier to reconcile. To your point on border security, the House, rather than taking up comprehensive immigration reform, is going to take up about 5 separate bills in the two categories. One category legal immigration, one category illegal immigration. Let's talk about legal for a minute. Let's talk real specifically about one bill is called the Visa Skills Act. It deals with the need for high-tech, high-skilled workers. While the United States has the most generous immigration policy in the world, we take in about 1 million immigrants a year. They're largely allowed in based on some sort of a lottery. Only 12% of the workers and immigrants that come into the United States come in based on a skill set or an education or some particular high-tech need that we have for our economy. 12%. Canada, who has a less generous immigration reform, the United Kingdom, Australia, and pretty much all of Europe, they allow 60% of their immigrants in based on some specific skill set or education. So their immigrants are coming in to help fulfill an economic need that grows their economy. We need to deal with that. So the Visa Skills Act in the House does this. It increases the what are called H-1B visas. They're the ones for the high-tech skill sets, or not necessarily high-tech, but specialized skill sets. We're going to raise that number from 55,000 to 165,000, and then allow another 40,000 students. Now, do you know that when we educate a foreign student, say to be an engineer or a scientist or some other high-tech, software developer in the United States, we require them upon graduation to go back to their country, which puts them into the global marketplace to be recruited, in many cases, by our competitors. We want to do away with that and make them legal immigrants. There's also an entrepreneur piece. There are a number of tracks for this. Okay. The other piece is called H-2A visas, which is where the ag workers come in. I would say in our office, the number one caseload issue is our veterans issues. The second largest caseload we have deals with this issue of immigration, because we have a lot of seasonal workers and farm skilled workers that are having troubles keeping their visas, getting their workers back, all of that. And that's true all over the country. So we're doing something similar with H-2As, the ag pieces. Okay, so you're going to allow more legal immigrants in. How are we going to be sure, right? How are we going to monitor that? On the illegal side, well, we claim to have somewhere around 11 or more million undocumented workers. 11 million people didn't walk across the Mexican U.S. border. 30 to 40% of them are people that came here legally and overstayed their visas. We need to do a better job of monitoring who's in our country. And one of the ways to do that is to bring even the legal immigration piece up to modern technology standards by using things like E-Verify. And if we not mandate but broaden the use of E-Verify, E-Verify is 99.7% accurate when it's used right. When it's used well. So we can build that infrastructure. We have the ability to do it, and we can do that. To allow, right now, if you're using seasonal labor, immigrant labor, you fill out what's called an I-9. It's a paper form. It takes months to get done, to get in, to get processed, and get back. E-Verify you can do on your cell phone in 2 minutes. And it's more accurate. So you know you're hiring a legal worker as opposed to an illegal worker. I'm going to get to your point. What about this border issue? So the Senate bill has all this money, it has all these workers, all of these guards, but so did the 1986 Act. And presidents ever since Ronald Reagan, including Ronald Reagan, have selectively chosen to not enforce the border for various reasons. Some of them perhaps economic, some of them perhaps compassion, appropriately, some of them whatever. But the consequence is we have a lot of undocumented workers in this country. So that said, what the House is proposing is that a couple of ways we'll deal with the border. One is that there will be a third party, probably government accounting office or something like that will verify benchmarks are met before we move on with immigration reform. In other words, the fences have to be up, the guards have to be there, the enforcement has to be proven before the next phase of immigration reform can take place. We need accountability at the border, not just a promise that we're going to do it. That's the first thing. The second thing is I don't know if you've noticed, but whenever states along the border who are dealing firsthand with the challenges of illegal immigration try to pass laws and enforce them, the Justice Department sues them. Our Justice Department sues the sovereign state. like Arizona, as opposed to backing them up. So what our bill does is called the SAFE Act. What the SAFE Act does is it allows states to pass their own laws as long as they're consistent with the federal laws, and then it makes them their laws to enforce, not ours to enforce. We also empower them to enforce the federal laws. And so by doing that and having that partnership, we think that we can do a lot more to secure the border. Now, I want to spend a moment talking about those 11 million or so undocumented workers. And this is where I might get in trouble with some of my friends. And there's a real debate going on among the Republican conference on this issue. How do you treat 11 million undocumented workers? First of all, let's acknowledge something. If they are here illegally, they've broken a law. If they are here illegally and they've broken other laws, they're, in my mind, they are a different category than people who are here illegally, where the only law they broke was to cross the border improperly to try and better their personal situation. Don't get me wrong, it's illegal, and we ought to find a way to draw them out of the shadows, as we hear talked about, make them productive citizens, or not citizens, productive members of our society that we know where they are, who they are, but not absolve them of their illegal action. And so we need, I think, a gentle stick, perhaps a deferred adjudication or something like that, so that they come out, they admit to their crime, but we don't treat them like they're a common thug if all they've ever done is come across the border to work. I think we need to be realistic about that. I think we've had a very harsh conversation about this topic that I think is not conducive to American spirit, frankly. And I know I run the risk of sounding soft when I say that, but I just think that's the truth. So I don't advocate a path to citizenship or amnesty at all. But I also want the punishment, if you will, to be conducive to the crime. So that's why I think some sort of a deferred adjudication process would be better than just sending them all back, because it's also not realistic. I want to tell you all a story that happened to Chris and me when we were in Washington. We got in a cab with a couple of friends, which means there were 4 of us, which meant one of us had to sit in the front seat, so that was me. And we were off, I spoke at one event, and I was on my way, running late to speak at another event one evening, and this issue came up, and my friends were from Texas, and we started talking about immigration, and I expressed grief, as I often have, that we've allowed some of the talking heads on cable television to sort of represent our view on immigration. And consequently, this very harsh rhetoric that talks about good people whose only crime was coming to America to better themselves, inappropriately, but did it, as though they came here to do harm to us. And that's not the case. The vast majority of the men and women who've done that. And also how we're going to deal with children. And that's another whole matter that we're going to have a real divide in our conference about, let me tell you. And I said, I grieve that. I wish that we would stop talking about people like something less than people. And stop talking about undocumented workers like they're all here to hurt us. And when we got to the location, the cab driver said, "Sir, I take it from your discussion and your position that you're a Republican member of Congress." I said, "I am." He said, "Sir, I am an immigrant. And I don't think we should kill our babies, and I don't think men should marry men, and I don't think that I think if I can't make a living in this country, it's my fault, not yours. And sir, I want you to know that I would fight to my death for this country against its enemies. But you, sir, are the first Republican who's spoken about me with dignity, and you give me hope." And I sat there in the front seat of the cab and cried, thinking, and I said, "I'm sorry. All I can say is I am sorry. Because we are a nation of immigrants." He never told me if he was legal or illegal. It didn't matter to me. And we can do better, you guys. We can do better than the way we've debated this issue. Yes, ma'am. Yes. No. Oh, no. She makes a very important point. She more articulately defines my point. We've allowed the radical media to define us. And you're exactly right. And that's why I'm saying, and that's why I'm saying how we talk about things matter. I guess that's the bottom line. So, forgive me if I seem soft. have a question? Three-tour combat.
And you know, this is all this. Yesterday, the IRS started checking verification, some service groups, they want their meeting. We thought, well, it's correct, we want to take it serious, wow. I'm not one of those people.
Okay, so Kent's point is, besides being a three-term combat veteran, he's been offended, as recently as today, by the fact that the IRS has now targeted the American Legion, I heard earlier, the VFW and other groups, as though the IRS has time to harass another patriotic organization. What they ought to do is come before Congress and testify instead of pleading the fifth. And they ought to tell us what they're doing. So forgive me if I no longer seem soft, but we have the full intention in the House of Representatives to cut the IRS by 34%, cut their budget by 34%. That may not be enough, quite frankly. It's funny, I had a reporter once say, well, if you keep cutting these budgets, aren't you really making it harder because you're going to cut the workforce? I said, I want to cut the workload. Not the workforce, the workload. They're doing too much to us. The overreach of the bureaucracy is phenomenal. And the IRS is leading the charge. And what I don't understand is why don't they get it? They are on the wrong side of the American public. They're on the wrong side of America, quite frankly. So people complain. I get this a lot from the left. You're wasting our time with all these oversight hearings. Well, guess what? When you're only 1/3 of the government, your main job is oversight of the other 2/3. And it's dragging people in, putting them under oath, people who know better. Remember this whole IRS scandal that started with the targeting of conservative groups? We were told there was a couple of rogue agents in Cincinnati. Oh, by the way, no, I guess it's a regional supervisor. Oh, no, wait a minute, it's the chief counsel at the IRS appointed by the president. And suddenly the hierarchy doesn't want to test